Australia has had a few challenging years of managing its relationship with China. During the COVID pandemic, then Prime Minister Scott Morrison called for a global inquiry into COVID 19's origin and angered China. China retaliated by imposing trade restrictions on a broad range of Australian goods. Since the current ruling Labour Party came to power in 2022, the Albanese government has pursued a better relationship with China. Nevertheless, Australia has been bolstering its defense by enhancing military ties with the US and other Western allies through AUKUS, a security treaty between Australia, US, and the UK. The competition for greater influence in the Pacific has also heated up, with China eagerly courting the Pacific Islands. Today, we speak to Richard McGregor, who's a senior associate with Lowy Institute, the premier think tank in Australia. He's a former Beijing and Washington bureau chief for the Financial Times and the author of numerous books on East Asia, including the latest one, Xi Jinping, The Backlash. His earlier book, The Party, The Secret World of China's Communist Rulers, 中国共产党不可说的秘密, is available in Taiwan. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, how has Australia's relationship with the region evolved over the last 20 years or so? Help our audience understand how Australia views itself in the region, its security, economic and trade, and of course, people to societal relationships.
Australia's a funny country. We are a former British colony, which is all a massive country, in fact, which has always struggled to come to terms with two things, the legacy of colonialism, the impact on Indigenous people, plus our picture in Asia. So Australia's relations with Asia, I guess, are characterised by a number of things. A concerted diplomatic effort, which has waxed and waned, but basically in one direction, to build strong ties with Southeast Asia, Japan, South Korea, China, less so Taiwan. But the second thing is that Australia basically has been at the core of Asian modernization in this respect. In fact, industrialization in first Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, most of all China, has all relied on Australian raw materials. And that's really how Australia has gotten rich. We are a US ally, a close US ally, but our largest trading partner by far is China. So therein relies a ton of tension.
Well, does Australia consider itself as part of Asia?
We're the odd man in rather than the odd man out. We used to have a colour bar on immigration, and that started to be unravelled from 1965. So if you come to Australia these days, it is a very multicultural country, and you go out in the suburbs, and they're not white suburbs anymore. Out in the big suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne, big Chinese, Indian, Bangladeshi, Middle Eastern, Vietnamese. It's hard to judge that impact on our politics, but it's not the country that it was 40 years ago in that respect.
Yeah, a lot of Taiwanese too actually emigrated to Australia, and of course, a lot of Chinese too. So let's delve into Australia, Taiwan, and Australia China relationships. First of all, how does the Australian government view Taiwan versus China? And how do the people, Australian people and society, view Taiwan and versus China?
We established ties in 1972 with China, sort of in the middle of other countries. I think since then we've been exceptionally cautious in relations with Taiwan, and I think it's become more cautious on both sides of politics in recent years. And I guess that's because of the change in Taiwan-China relations, particularly the election of the DPP in 2016. For example, Australia used to send ministers to Taiwan maybe once every year or 2 years. They don't do that anymore. The last time was 2012. We were negotiating a free trade agreement with Taiwan, but that was knocked on the head in 2017.
So Australia's relationship with Taiwan in some way depends on the cross relationship. So if Beijing is nice to Taiwan, then indirectly it affects, how Australia deals with Taiwan as well. Is that right?
If you look at polling about Australian attitudes to Taiwan, we did polling last year on what Australians would do if there were a Taiwan contingency. In other words, a conflict, cross-straits conflict. It was, a 70-80% said we should assist Taiwan. But I guess the once you get to would we have boots on the ground in any conflict, the number went right down. But actually, it didn't go down that far. I think it was 40 to 45% said we would even assist in the military contingency, which to me was pretty high. And I think it's a product of the way that China's behaved in recent years.
I want to touch on the DPP, as you mentioned several times. So Taiwan's new president, Lai Ching-te, was just inaugurated. And of course, China launched 2 days of air and sea drills surrounding the island as punishment for so-called separatist acts following his inauguration. For most Taiwanese people, interestingly, this is almost a routine and sort of expected reaction from Beijing. However, for the rest of the world, right, they hold a more alarming view and emphasize the need for Taiwan to significantly beef up its defense. What is your view? Why is there such a gap in perceiving China's military threats to Taiwan?
So China just keeps getting, for want of a better way of putting it, better and better at this. And I know the Taiwanese are used to it. It's much like the South Koreans are used to screaming from North Korea, but the time will come when it's real. And I guess people in the Australian government, like in Washington, look on Taiwan and would like to see more alacrity, not less.
So you do believe the threat is pretty real?
Yeah, I think so. Beijing is not going to stop. Taiwan public opinion is not interested in being ruled by Beijing. And the trouble is that Beijing has been so bad at reassuring anybody in Taiwan that the only tools they have left in the kit, apart from disinformation and the like, are military. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think there's going to be a war tomorrow. I don't think China wants to fight a war. But yes, I think the situation remains dangerous. People always ask me, is there going to be a war? And I say, well, they say, when's the most dangerous time? And I would say, every year for the next 15 years.
Yeah, but at least it sounds better than some of the years that's given from Washington, D.C. 2027, right?
I understand why that's the case because she asked the PLA to be ready then. But if you think about it, 2027 is also the year that she will be seeking a fourth term. All indications point to that. Do you start a war at that time, particularly after 3-4 years of what is likely to be subpar economic growth, which is going to eat away at Xi's standing and allow his many enemies inside China to maybe start to organize a little bit?
How does the Labor Party's foreign policy diverge from Liberal Party? I mean, specifically with regards to China and maybe military and defense issues.
The foreign policies diverge very little. Labor Party has always had ownership of the China relationship because they are the ones that broke out of the conservative straitjacket in the 70s and started the relationship. Since then, it's been pretty bipartisan. The Labor Party made a big decision just to not speak in public as critically of China as the previous government did. Policies do more, say less. Look at the concrete things they're doing. For example, joining Japan and the US in patrols off the Philippines. That's the major direction.
Since we talk about Quad, also we want to talk about AUKUS. I think it would be really helpful if you explain how they're different and their objectives.
Well, the Quad is not a security alliance. In fact, we don't really know what the Quad is. That's one of its problems. We would hope it would be more, but they've had various initiatives which haven't come off. And of course, the position of India has become very muddied in the wake of the Russia's invasion of Ukraine and criticism of Modi personally. So the Quad is not quite at a standstill, but it needs a bit of energy, and we'll see whether we can give it that. The AUKUS is a much, much bigger deal and a very big deal, actually. I think that's one area where I'd criticise the current Australian government because I don't think they've really prepared the people for how big AUKUS is. In about 2-3 years in Perth, in Western Australia, we're going to have a permanently rotating or nuclear-powered subs from the US and the UK. They're not stationed there, we can't say that, but they're going to be there permanently and then rotated. And that is really a bit of a game changer for Australia.
Some worry all the actions, whether it's AUKUS, Quad, or other types of security alliance that's new, may actually provoke China. Is it more about preparedness or is it provocation?
I don't think we're provoking China. I mean, China's engaging in its own massive military build-up. Xi Jinping said to Putin, we're making changes never seen before in a century." I mean, how do they expect people to react, to sit on their hands? But it's difficult. I think we focus a lot on Xi Jinping. I understand why we do that. But if he were to leave the stage tomorrow, just imagine that. Uh, China's Taiwan policy would not change. China's South China Sea policy would not change. Its view on the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands would not change. These are baked into the cake, into the CCP governing system and global outlook. And so these aren't problems that we fix and they go away. So it's a matter of deterrence. We all want to maintain the peace in the region, and I would say including China. But there's a number of issues which are are pretty intractable and are going to require long-term work by all of us.
Well, speaking of which, so among all these crises, what worries you the most? Some worry about U.S. presidential election in November, potential conflicts in South China Sea or across Taiwan Strait, Middle East crisis spinning out of control, Russia advances in Ukraine, or unregulated AI taking over humans, or climate change.
Can I say all of the above? I don't. How do we prioritize that? I think one of the most interesting things is the relations between Russia, China, North Korea, to some extent Iran. Whether I think the China-Russia relationship is very strong, but whether it can be really embedded and sustained along with other autocratic regimes and leveraged in a way that America manages to leverage its allies. It's a very contested region. China wants to, particularly in Southeast Asia, is very, very good at internalizing the view in most of those countries that, it's game over, we're going to win, America's going to lose, get with the program, we'll look after you. And I think that's very wrong. I think it's very contested. As long as countries like Australia and Japan, to a lesser extent South Korea, maybe Singapore, are willing to, stand up for their interests and sovereignty. I think in one respect, the Americans have been successful under Trump and Biden. China's not leaving the region. We can't divorce China. It's an immensely important economic partner, even for Taiwan, of course, but in the Pacific nations where the pressure is rising. So I don't quite know where it's going to end up, but I certainly fear trouble ahead because of Taiwan, but also the South China Sea.
Yeah, that's to be seen for sure. Well, with that, thank you so much for the interview today.
Thank you.
That was Richard McGregor in conversation with Taiwan Plus News. You can find more stories from Taiwan and around the world on the Taiwan Plus website. Thanks for watching and see you next time.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for Taiwan Plus.
Taiwan Plus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.
Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee,
we make the news.
Here's what happened on Taiwan Plus.